Lovely people of the internet, let's try this again. My name is Christopher Balkaran. Welcome to another live, folks. Thank you. Before I begin, I just want to say an honest thank you. Thank you to every single person who's liked, shared, and subscribed. You're seeing that I'm posting daily now, uploading shorts and videos almost daily. And the reason why I do this is because I truly love researching and finding these nuggets in government research, in trends and analyses that our government isn't talking about, that our media isn't talking about. And I'd like to think it's not deliberate. I'd like to think that there's just too much to cover and they just can't get to this. But often I find that many times it is deliberate. All the videos I've done on temporary foreign workers and immigration and high levels of Indian international students have not been even mentioned or discussed by our politicians or our media to the level that they should be. And that gives me a little bit more pause for concern because I wonder what's going on. Everybody that I talk to says the same things and raises the same concerns. Why isn't our media and our government talking about it? And so that's why I do what I do. So what would and you've seen it, um, with the comments and the likes and the subscribes. So what I want from you, a small PSA, but please tell one family member, one friend, one coworker about this channel. And the reason I say that is because there aren't that many Canadian voices talking about things that are done in a way where, I link research, I talk about what StatsCan says, etc., in a way where we're trying to understand what the government's doing. And folks, not to toot my own horn because I don't think I had any, say in this, but I look at what the government is doing now with Mark Carney's government, and I see that there is a stark difference from Carney to the years of Justin Trudeau. And many of the things that I talk about on this channel, I actually see liberals talking about as well. And in the latest budget, I see a retrenching from, the dependency on temporary foreign workers and international students. And I'd like to think that policymakers are talking to the community, which I hope they are, but I also think that they're consuming social media, as we all are, and they're seeing what Canadians are talking about. They're seeing what Canadians are valuing. They're seeing what Canadians are commenting, liking, sharing, and subscribing to. And that's our real power here on YouTube. Our power is to help shape the public policy that we want to see from our leaders, because I do think there's a reason they're not talking about it. There's a reason our media isn't talking about it. Like, I do think there are reasons for that. So, all of that to say, please like, share, and subscribe. Who knows who's watching your comments, who's engaging, but I do think that on some level, um, people are. And I think that's very, very important. Give me a second, folks. I think everything is going well here. I don't see any issues. Okay, I'm just going to keep going and we'll see where this goes. Hopefully you can see and hear me. Okay, folks, we're going to do something today. We're going to talk about something that I've wanted to talk about, and I did in my last video, about the number of Gen Z young people who are leaving the greater Toronto area. The immigration that's happening. We always hear about the immigration to Toronto. It's in the hundreds of thousands now, and it's going to grow. It's going to keep growing, but we never talk about the emigration. And in this video, we're going to talk about the emigration out of Toronto that we're seeing now, or that we have been seeing over the past few years. And we're also going to talk about, cost of living and fertility rates and all the things that I've been discussing in my previous videos. So if these are topics you want to hear more of, like, share, subscribe. Again, tell that one friend, tell that one coworker, tell that one family member about this channel. That's how these conversations end up in the psyche of more and more Canadians. And folks, let me just remind everyone here, I don't care if you're left, right, indifferent. I'm a genuinely concerned Canadian. about where our country is going, and I'm concerned about what can happen. And I think that concern is valid. So many of you have shared that concern with me as well. What I'd like for us to do in a truly, truly Canadian effort and energy, let's all try to be as respectful of each other as possible. Let's maintain that civility. Let's make sure that we're being kind and respectful. And we're also not trying to cast blame on anyone. Remember, at the end of the day, these are failed government policies. And that's the root of the issue. Perhaps they themselves, they being the government, not to taking into consideration the concern Canadians have. So, with that caveat, let's get into it. Folks, I want to share my screen with you and share with you what I found before we begin about the mass exodus away from Canada. Now, I want to share with you this really interesting study that I don't think many people really they really talk about. But here we go. Okay, this is from Statistics Canada. Okay, and the title of the report is Fertility in Canada 1921 to 2022. Okay, just bear with me, folks. You'll see where I'm going with this. Okay, so it provides an in-depth look at trends in fertility in Canada from 1921 to 2022. Total fertility rate, and let me just be very clear, refers to the number of children that a woman would be expected to have over the course of her reproductive life if she experienced at each age the fertility rates observed over the course of a given calendar year. So total fertility rate, the number of children that a woman would be expected to have over the course of her reproductive life. Canada's total, now this is from 2022, but the numbers have been going down since. Just want to mention the 5 lowest values ever recorded were 2022, 2020, 2021, 2019, 2018. By the way, folks, 2024 was 1.25. So our fertility rate as a country is going down, not unlike other countries, but it is still going down. Here's a graph people don't really talk about. Total fertility rate and historical events in Canada. So it's so interesting that StatsCan does this. So in 1921, it was about 3.5. It goes down due to the Great Depression, which then follows the Second World War, where we see this increase. And of course, the boomers, the soldiers coming back from war, the baby boom generation from the 1940s to the 60s goes up and up. We're at 3.8 on average, almost 4. And then this is from StatsCan, 1960, authorization to sell the contraceptive pill to regulate the hormonal cycle. And then we see the drop. 1969, decriminalization of contraception and abortion. Very interesting. Again, that StatsCan is mapping this out. The birth rate completely drops. This red line, I don't know if they indicate it here. Yeah, cohort replacement level. So this red line means that this is the number of births a woman would need to have to reproduce our population. So you can see that our cohort replacement level was hit in the early 1970s, and we have not hit our cohort replacement level since. A slight uptake in 1991, early 1990s, and again a decline. Slight uptick in 2007, 2008, and then a consistent decline. And then the start of the pandemic is in 2020, slight uptick, and it's gone down. And I can tell you that as of, again, 2024, StatsCan data for 2024 shows 1.25 is the fertility rate. Now, you might be asking, Christopher, why are we talking about fertility rates? Why does that matter? It matters for a few reasons. Number one, Canada's been on a fertility rate decline since the 70s and even before then, as you can see with the introduction of contraceptives. This is actually very important for our country. Remember, the multiculturalism policy, the immigration policies were ushered in the late 1960s into the 1970s. And I think the government at the time realized that a declining fertility rate, we may never see those higher fertility rates of the Great Depression and the boomer generation, at least for many generations moving forward. And so immigration, although small at the time with economic immigration, was actually out of necessity, not necessarily out of a want to, embrace every culture of the world. I say all of this because as our fertility rate has continued to decline, I imagine the government, especially now with that we're at 1.25, and it is projected that this will drop below 1. In BC, it's around 1. I say all of this because I can see the government saying, then this is why we're going to be more aggressive with immigration. Economic immigrants are only a few hundred thousand that we admit into Canada every year. We would have a shrinking population, an inverted population demographic triangle, if I say that right. And so I think that they're using this data to say, okay, this is why we need to go more hard on immigration. We need to increase our numbers. And maybe, just maybe, they're saying to themselves, economic immigration isn't the only way, because economic immigrants who have master's level, at least, education, who have professional designations, who are scientists, surgeons, doctors, lawyers, etc., they have multiple options. Canada isn't always the number one option for so many economic immigrants. They have options in the G7, the G20 even. There's less taxation in some countries, better weather, so for those reasons, Canada's like, okay, well, maybe economic immigrants is not the way. Maybe temporary foreign workers, international students is the way, especially with that rapidly declining fertility rate, excuse me. Now, I must say I wasn't able to find fertility rates broken down by demographics, by race and ethnicity in Canada, because I assume that certain racial groups, racial groups, South Asian, there may be higher fertility rates. That's an assumption on my part, but I'd like to see that data. Again, that helps us contextualize perhaps why governments are going so hard on temporary foreign workers and international students. One of many reasons could be our free falling fertility rate here in Canada. I'm going to pause there. Let me know what you think in the comments below. If you think the total fertility rate is part of the factor that goes into why the government is going so hard on getting more temporary foreign workers and international students in Canada. I say that because over the past few years, we've accepted over 3 million temporary foreign workers and international students. That's clearly by design, and I do think the total fertility rate plays a role in that. But let me know what you think in the comments below. Very interesting graph. And again, I'll share this again for those that are just joining. Thanks so much for joining the live. Again, like, share, comment, subscribe. Share this channel with one friend, one coworker, one family member. That's my ask. But folks, look at this chart: total fertility rate and historical events. This is directly from Statistics Canada, and you can see the boomers of 1940s to the 60s. The fertility rate was really high in Canada, and then it's been in free fall ever since, with the introduction of contraceptives, with the decriminalization of contraception and abortion. And it's been going down ever since. Very, very interesting. Again, that Stats Can posted it with those exact indicators. Um, Debonair Brother says 40% of new mothers were born abroad. Really interesting. And the fertility rate of Southeast Asian is much higher. I need more data. If you can link studies in the chat, Debonair Brother, I would love that. Great name, by the way. But I just think that we need to, like, I'd love to know more breakdowns on that. Now, you might be asking, folks, why do I find this very surprising that the data is presented this way? And I'll tell you honestly, I've mentioned this before on previous lives. Youth unemployment is at 15% generally nationally in Canada, but that's of Canadian citizens. There is no youth unemployment data on international students and temporary foreign workers. And I think that's by design. Because if we were to compare Canadian citizen youth unemployment to temporary foreign workers slash international student youth unemployment, it would be a stark difference between 15% for citizens and like maybe 1 to 2% for temporary foreign workers and international students. It's an assumption on my part, but the data to me typically isn't presented in as fair a way for us to have a conversation. Um, Thanks so much, Debonair brother. He says my voice is perfect for radio. That's great. I don't I am in YouTube Live's like room and it does have the chat. I don't see the link, but feel free to DM me, or I can Google it while we're talking. But thank you so much for doing that, and thank you for saying that about my voice. Maybe I should do radio one day. But anyways, yes, many times the data is not presented in a fair way where we can have an honest discussion. Very interesting that StatsCan has this graph because you'd think that this would fan the flames of like feminism and the feminist movement, to say, well, the fertility rate's in decline because of contraception, and that's feminism's fault. Da da da. But really, I think it's to spark dialogue and conversation about the fertility rate and the introduction of contraceptive ideas. Um, the thing I think that we need to also talk about, I see a comment in the chat. Let me just pause on that for 1 second. The thing I want us to talk about, I just lost my train of thought. Oh, yeah. The way in which data is presented is so important for Canadians. And I'm really surprised that StatsCan did that. Really interesting. Okay, Shrey Patel. Oh, sorry, Debonair brother says CTV News foreign-born mothers. Okay, let me Google that right now. Thanks, Debonair brother. While we're doing that, that's very interesting. Oh, here we go. Thanks. Oh, wow, it was released. Wow, it was like November 13th. Let me share my screen. Thanks for that, Debonair brother. More than 40% of Canadian births had foreign-born mothers in 2024. Now, Debonair brother, as before I read this, I wonder if the fertility rate, though it's in decline, like if it's 1.25, that just means that 40% of the 1.25 were foreign born, which is actually more interesting. Um, da, 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 da. A new study released found that in 2024, more than 40% of babies were born to a mother themselves who were not born in Canada. Okay. It doesn't say if they're Canadian citizens, though. 57% of new mothers over the age of 40 were foreign born. Very interesting. That's the other thing. People are having kids later in life. Okay, very, very interesting. I need to look at this study some more, but very interesting data. Thank Debonair, brother. Really interesting stuff. Okay, so I see some comments in the chat, but I wanted to get to something that has been I mentioned before, and I'll keep mentioning it. Um, the way the data is being presented, and the one thing I want to share with you is a perfect example of where data is being presented, but it's being presented in a way that I think furthers a narrative that I don't think is beneficial to Canadians who have questions. So I'm going to ask you this question. Do you think temporary foreign workers and international students are taking jobs from young Canadians, right? Are temporary foreign workers and international students taking jobs from young Canadians? And the reason I say that is because the youth unemployment rate here in Canada is 15%. And in some regions, it's 20%. Yet there's no data nor studies on the youth unemployment rate for temporary foreign workers and international students. So just on that alone, I can't say for certain, but I would surmise that jobs that young Canadians would apply for are being taken by temporary foreign workers and international students. I think most Canadians would probably think that, especially when a lot of Canadians are messaging me saying that their kids can't find work right here in Canada. Now, this is how the CBC, the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, tackled this topic. So it starts with a really good question. Are temporary foreign workers taking young Canadians' jobs? Here's what the experts think. And note how they say experts. Okay. So this was posted in September of this year. Okay. They mentioned that conservative leader Pierre Poilievre and Premier David Eby of BC demanded Ottawa scrap or reform the temporary foreign worker program, claiming it was shutting young people out of jobs and driving down wages. But their expert, an immigration lawyer, Mark Holth, an immigration lawyer in Alberta, says that the temporary foreign worker program requires employers to prove there's no Canadian available to do the job and that they're paying them a prevailing wage rate. Quote, it's designed not to put downward pressure on wages. And then it goes on to say open work permits. Da, da, da. Okay, so this is where I think here's what they say down here. A canary in the coal mine. Fabian Lange, an economics professor at McGill, said on Thursday that Canada's high youth unemployment is primarily a business cycle phenomenon. Youth unemployment is like a canary in the coal mine. It's one of the measures that moves the most with the business cycle. That's interesting, Professor Fabian, because if the business cycle is in a downward cycle, why is there no data on young international students and young temporary foreign workers looking for work? And I think it's done I think it's done intentionally, right? I think the CBC is doing that intentionally because they don't actually want to talk to researchers who are saying, yeah, there might be a correlation between high youth unemployment and high numbers of temporary foreign workers and international students. I'll paint you this picture. Since 2022, I believe, don't quote me, I think it might be 2021, we've let in over 2.5 million temporary foreign workers, international students, through the International Mobility Program, which does not require a labor market impact assessment. It's not the temporary foreign worker program that's the problem, because that only admits a few 100,000 people per year. It's the International Mobility Program, where international students, temporary foreign workers they come and they work in the periphery sector and they compete for the same jobs that young Canadians would compete for. The Tim Hortons, fast food, the condo security. I keep saying condo security. I live in downtown Toronto. I mean, that's all we know here. Condo land everywhere, right? So that's what I'm saying. It's like there's a lot of there's a lot there, and I don't think StatsCan or other government documents are going to be researching this topic because, to be honest, folks, I don't think it's in their best interest to show Canadians that, in fact, this is happening, because that would mean that most Canadians would be in uproar against the International Mobility Program. And as I said earlier in my live about the shrinking fertility rate, we have an inverted population triangle if we didn't have high levels of immigration. So I don't think it works in their benefit to actually say that we're having these young people come from India to Canada, and yes, they're taking Canadian jobs. Like, I don't think that's in their best interest to show that correlation. And that's why I think it's so important. There's channels like this. So like, share, subscribe, folks. Like I said, tell one friend, tell one family member, tell one coworker about this channel because I don't think anyone else is having these conversations on YouTube, on our social media in a meaningful way where I'm really trying to unpack the data that they're putting out there. Okay, rant over. But I want to share that with you because it's so important. Now, why am I talking about a declining fertility rate and high levels of temporary foreign workers, high levels of international students, high levels of youth unemployment amongst Canadian citizens? Why am I talking about all of this? It's because of the cost of living that is driving young people out of our big cities. Our young people are leaving our cities in record numbers. So here's something I want to share with you. You might have seen this on my recent video. And shameless plug, this is going to be in my this is going to be in my newsletter. So if you haven't subscribed to my newsletter, guys, just throwing out all these PSAs here, but like, let me make sure that we are doing this respectfully. So hit that like button, hit subscribe, but also check out my newsletter. It's in the link below of this live. This is actually really an interesting study. Young families are leaving the GTA in search of family-sized homes. Get this, folks. The housing shortage. I wish I could zoom in. Can I zoom in? Why can't I zoom in? Let's see. Here we go. The housing shortage has caused 80,000 more people to move out of the GTA and other parts of Canada each year. Now, again, folks, you might think, oh, these are like older people, people with families. No, young families, specifically adults in their late 20s and early 30s, and children under 5 are the group most likely to move out of the GTA. Although recent changes to immigration and non-permanent residence policies reduce the demand for housing, the high number of people in their early 20s ensures robust demographic-based housing demand for years to come. So they estimate GTA will need to build 30,000 ground-oriented homes, 20,000 apartment units, when we're only building 10,000 ground-oriented and not nearly enough apartments. And that's just to keep pace. Now, here's what's really wild, folks. Look at this graph. And this is from StatsCan. GTA net population change from domestic migration July 1 to June 30 by year. So you can see, look at that. How crazy is that? Now, the gray is those within the province. So most people are leaving Toronto but staying within Ontario. And there's that small pink is those between provinces. Very, very interesting, folks. A lot of people are leaving the GTA. And it's not, I know that we get over 150,000 immigrants arriving in the city every year. But clearly there is a need for us to be talking about this more. Now, you might be asking yourself, Christopher, like, why? What's going on? And you don't have to go far. It's the cost of living in our big city, housing being the biggest indicator of the cost of living, or sorry, the biggest reason and rationale for the cost for people moving out. Here's an example I want to share with you of that. And again, I'd love to know what you think. So please, please let me know what you think in the comments below. Okay, so this is again from the CBC, my favorite media for Canada. Ontario's young people are leaving the province in droves. The soaring cost of living is to blame. Now, this was written back in 2023, but check this story out. This is from Nicole Forster. 25-year-old nurse from London, Ontario, whose pay has been frozen for years, chronically underfunded healthcare system. Now she says, quote, "I'm leaving the province at the end of April. In Ontario, it feels like I'm never going to be able to own a house." She's moving to Edmonton, a city where the average one-bedroom rental is now $10.99, and an average home is $369,000 as of last month. A far cry from the $1,700 for a one-bedroom rental in London or a $621,000 home in her hometown of London. This is back in 2023, but Some 50,000 people left Ontario for Alberta or Atlantic Canada in the last 12 months. Soaring cost of living, stagnant wages, and low housing affordability. And then, of course, record out migration from Ontario. That chart showed it, um, which is really interesting. Again, 80,000 is the number they quote here. In the last 12 months, we've attracted the same amount of people, but we've actually lost an extra 50 to 130,000. Um, Very, very interesting. So very interesting to see this. And is this a surprise um, to anyone who's watching? I don't think so personally. I think, in fact, the opposite. I think that we're all actually very, very aware of the cost of living in our big cities. And I know I'm going to sound arrogant when I say this. So please let me know in the comments if you agree. But other cities around the world, like in Tokyo and in Hong Kong, it's very common to see micro condos prop up. Even in New York City, there's like micro condos that are like 100, not 100, maybe like 200 to 300 square feet. Uh-oh. And like, I know New York City is a North American city, but I just don't know if Canadians would live in a micro condo in Toronto. I don't know that. If you got a micro condo, say it was 200 square feet in downtown Toronto, you're on the subway line, you're close to work, etc., would you live in that? Um, and I think this is the issue that a lot of Canadians are wrestling with because I think Canadians, unlike Americans, actually do want open space. Like I know Americans really want open space too, but I don't know. I feel like Canadians are different. I don't know if many would be okay with tighter living quarters than what currently exists. Again, I know that sounds very arrogant given it's a world-class city still. We're a G7 nation. Every country seems to be going this way of high housing, high cost of living. Canada's no different in our big cities. But when it comes to housing, I feel like Canadians are holding out because we do want that, like, 1,500, 2,000 square foot home, a backyard to raise our kids, etc. And I feel like they're not going to be um, as popular. So I mentioned this before, but I remember talking to you all again. A lot of people have talked about population replacement, the outward flows, the outward migration, emigration of Canadian citizens from our big cities, and the inward flows of higher levels of immigrants who actually may be comfortable and okay with micro condos and smaller space living may actually shape our entire demographics of our city. Now, I know some people might think of that as like xenophobic or racist. I don't. I just think that of this as just like factual based evidence and having an evidence based discussion. The facts are clear. There are outward flows of migration from young people, and there are inward flows from people around the world coming to our big cities and wanting to live. And so I know that that's something that is happening. Um, Sorry, I see a lot of comments in the chat, so my apologies if I missed yours, but I see Man of Sand says deregulation in places like Tokyo, Hong Kong, Houston has enabled these smaller and more flexible dwellings to pop up, especially for the lower rent markets. Toronto is doing laneway homes. Yes, good point, Man of Sand. Do you think those are going to take off though? I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm so arrogant and I'm wrong. I'm just thinking like culturally speaking, I don't know if Canadians would, but maybe I'm totally wrong and I'm out to lunch and I don't know what I'm talking about. But I do think that the outward flows of young people from our big cities is actually perhaps an indicator that they wouldn't be willing to stay and live in a laneway home in a smaller space, even if they can afford it. And so, does this lead to quote population replacement in our big cities? I don't know, but I'd love to know what you think in the comments below. So, those outward migration flows are really, really interesting. And, folks, just to kind of like cap this discussion, I want to share this really interesting study with you. as well, because I think this is also really interesting. Um, this was done in August of this year by the Fraser Institute. Exodus of young people suggests Ontario is an increasingly less desirable place to live. So, using statistic data from StatsCan, over the 4-year period from 2020 to 2021 to 23-24, 277,000 people migrated to Ontario from other provinces, while 381,725 left Ontario to move to a different province or territory. Ontario saw a net loss of 104,426 people. And then they break it down by age. Da, 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 uh, Looking at working individuals, we lost a lot. These are concerning trends. And so a question for you is, do you think that this is cyclical? Because I don't know. Um, the Fraser Institute talks about taxation levels, etc. But then, people who say, "Oh, we shouldn't be overthinking this, da da da. It's cyclical. Once the economy gets better, it'll be better for all Canadians, and people will want to move back to Toronto and da da da." I hear that point, but there are projections that um, the rents for, like, say, a one-bedroom condo in downtown Toronto, by 2030, they're going to hit $3,000 a month on average. That mortgage payments on a one-bedroom condo, say you're a young person, you wanna save up for and buy your own place, um, mortgage payments are going to be around $4,000 a month for a one-bedroom condo. So you can imagine, if you want a single family home in the GTHA, with a backyard and a two car garage, you're looking at what, 8, 9, $10,000 a month for a mortgage. That is pretty wild. Now, I have no idea how salary and wages will increase alongside this, but if history's an indication, salary and wages have not kept up. So my bet is that salary and wages probably still won't catch up in 5 years. But I could be wrong. I could be wrong. Nobody has a crystal ball. Nobody knows what, Toronto's gonna look like in 5 years. But I think that there is something to be said about these outward flows, of immigration from Ontario by Canadian citizens, and that is so key. Because we do know that there's outward flows of migration from, highly skilled economic immigrants who leave Canada now, but I'm more concerned about young Canadians who are, leaving our big city. And the reason I say this is because our big cities are for young people. Like, the vibrancy of the city, the investments, they're for young people, to spend money, etc., to engage in everything the city has to offer. And so if we're pricing so many young people out of here, like, where are they gonna go? Um, and I think that this is going to be a really big issue. So I'd love to know what you think. I'm going to keep covering this because I think it's so important. And the link from fertility rates to housing to temporary foreign workers and international students to outward emigration flows, to me, it's clearly a link that no one's really talking about. And we need to be unpacking this more closely. Um, it is, I mentioned this before too, but like, immigrants, temporary foreign workers, international students who are coming here in high numbers, there's no housing for them. And so we're seeing that there's a lot of illegal rooming houses. I talked about the Brampton fire last week, so tragic, but there's a lot of that that's happening as well. So there's all these like rippling out effects by the government's decision, which we need to talk about. We need to make sure our governments are talking about it. We need to make sure that the policies that they're implementing are more evidence based and not this like haphazard way of looking at our immigration, because we're reaching a tipping point, I think, in many of our big cities. Okay, folks, I have talked for 39 minutes and 43 seconds. Some of you could probably hear my voice is getting pretty raspy. And I see a lot of comments in the chat. So, folks, this is what I want you to do. I want you to, again, like, share, comment, subscribe, tell everyone about this channel. I want you to also please look at my content, comment, let me know what I'm doing right, let me know what I'm doing wrong. I have a newsletter as well. Subscribe to that. It's in the description of this video. Um, Major shout out to Debonair brother for sending some links on some of the topics I'm talking about. Let me know if you want to see more of these lives. I'm trying to mix it up, do some lives, do some shorts, do some regular videos. So I'm just going to keep doing this content, and we're going to keep talking about this stuff. It is so, so important for the future of our country. Thank you so much for joining, folks. I can't thank you enough. Like, share, comment, and subscribe, and I'll definitely catch you in the next one. Take care. Have a great night and a week ahead.